Today on Bridges, Phil Cooke is my guest, and we're going to talk about church on trial. Welcome to Bridges. I'm Monica Schmelter. I'm glad that you could join me today. Phil Cooke is my guest, and we're going to talk about church on trial. We all know that crises come, and how do we handle them? And Phil, it's so good to have you on Bridges.
Well, thank you.
Today.
I love being here. I love you guys. I love CTN. I love the set. You guys have done a great job.
Thank you. And we're so glad to have you here. We're glad that you and Kathleen have moved right from LA.
Yeah, we moved from LA after 35 years.
My goodness.
To Nashville.
Yeah.
We're not leaving LA. We'll be going back a lot. We still have an office there, but we wanted to expand. You know, we're producers, television producers, and we work mostly with churches and ministry organizations, and we're actually closer to a lot of the churches and ministries we work with. So it works out really well.
Yeah, and we're just so glad to have you.
That's
and
fun.
While I look at this book, Church on Trial, and I think like none of us want to be on trial, right?
No.
And we don't want crises.
Right.
But we all see crises in the church every single day.
Yeah.
Everything from like social media wars
Yes.
to moral failure, embezzlement, like all of these things. So what do we do, Phil?
Well, it's funny, you know, as you said, I'm a producer, but over the years, as I guess I was known as a professional communicator, I started getting calls from churches and ministry leaders when they were going through a crisis. And like you say, there's a million types. It could be a sexual issue, it could be a financial issue, it could be a criticism issue from the outside or a lawsuit. And they don't teach this stuff in seminary or Bible college.
No.
So most ministry leaders have no idea what to do or how to respond. And they would call me about, do I need an attorney? Should I release a statement? Should I talk to reporters? So I started helping churches and ministry organizations. And after years and years and years of doing it, I thought, you know what? Maybe I need to put this into a book so that leaders can have on their desk when some crisis happens. And like you say, it's not if a crisis will happen, it's when a crisis will happen. It's very hard to avoid it in this digital social media world we live in.
And you said it so well that in seminary, we don't learn, like there's nothing about this. And so it's been more than 20 years ago, but when my husband was pastoring, we got a report that someone in our congregation had, molested their own child.
Wow.
And so there was no thought process with us to cover it up. We immediately called the police. Like we did all the things we were supposed to do. What I didn't know how to do is how to answer all of the questions that came my way. Because this was a little girl. So you don't want people to know her name. And this is a girl that's hurting. And so when these crises happen, there's a lot of heartbreak. So there's that part of it. And like you said, do you do press releases? Do you make comments? I had no idea.
Yeah, it's very difficult. It's very challenging.
I didn't know you then.
And in a situation like that, people underestimate how serious it really is.
Yeah.
And something that I think it's worth mentioning is that anytime you have a sexual relationship, an adulterous relationship, anytime there's an imbalance of power, say a pastor and a church member, an adult and a child, a college professor and a student, that's always an abusive situation, always. And you have to report it. Those kind of abusive situations need to be reported to authorities. In the old days, people didn't know. They were ignorant. The laws were just being made. And very often it was the family that would say, well, let's just keep this quiet. We don't want to embarrass the family. But now there's no question. I've seen pastors who had nothing to do with the abuse, but it was a staff member. But the pastor was threatened with jail just because he didn't report it in a timely way. So this is serious. So we need to really, in fact, one of the studies I encountered writing the book indicates that 27% of people that leave the church today for good leave it because of a crisis at the church or how poorly the church handled the crisis. That's a quarter of the church members we're losing because we're not handling this well. So it's a really critical issue.
It's a lot of people, right? And it's people's souls. I mean, this is important stuff that leaders aren't told, ill-equipped. What do we do? And none of us want this because it's just it's awful. But how can a church be prepared because it will come their way?
Yeah, it will. Absolutely.
What are some things?
At some level, it will come their way. There's no question. In fact, I often say that if you're a church really making an impact in your community, you're going to get somebody from the outside, maybe a disgruntled ex-church member or a disgruntled ex-employee who's going to criticize you on social media, create a Facebook page with nothing but criticism. It's just going to happen. So how you do it is really important. And I think you start by creating a really transparent culture at your church or your ministry. You know, a culture where people are unafraid to say, Pastor, wait a minute, what you said the other day might be inappropriate or might be perceived wrong, or you know, don't take that trip without your wife or another male companion. There's so many things that can get you into trouble today. Social media has just opened up a Pandora's box of problems.
Well, because anybody can say anything.
Anybody,
you just go on there and you post and you think, well, should I hide that comment? Should I respond back?
Yes.
Do I let them have it because that's a lie?
That's true.
Right? Because you do get angry. And I can understand that, being falsely accused, or if it's true, just because it's true doesn't mean it needs to go on social media.
Exactly.
Also, right?
That's true. You know, very often. And the other thing is email. That trips up a lot of people. You know, I know Google and a lot of other email servers have said, even when you delete an email, they don't really delete it.
Right.
You know, it's deleted in your inbox, but it's still out there. And so we see cases where a court case happens and suddenly these emails are brought to light and nobody even knew they were there. And so I always say, never fire people in an email, never criticize people in an email, never say anything in an email that you wouldn't want to announce publicly, because it could come back to bite you very, very easily, particularly if you're a leader.
Yeah. So that's a way to safeguard yourself.
Oh, it is. It is.
Don't say anything you don't want to come back later in an email, because it's in writing and it never goes away.
Absolutely. And once you hit send on an email, you've lost control of that.
Yeah.
You know, and I may send you an email criticizing somebody today, and you're my friend now, but a year from now, you may not be my friend, and you have that email.
Right. And it's sad that all this happens amongst Christians, but it does.
It
right?
does.
People turn on people, they betray people. And, you know, let's just be honest. Sometimes we say something in an email that we really don't mean, right? We're angry at that moment, or we haven't prayed about it, we haven't processed it, and we say more than what needs to be said.
Absolutely.
And that could come back. I mean, it could hurt that relationship at that moment, but it could also come back a year later.
So true. And with email, and particularly with social media, we often say things to people that we would never say face to face. And we need to be sensitive about that. You know, there's so many critics out there. I envision somebody, I get some critical emails from time to time, and I envision a guy sitting in his pajamas in his parents' basement. You know, he has nothing to do but criticize people online. And there are trolls out there, and I don't hesitate to block those people who are unrepentant. They're just going to criticize you no matter what. So we just have to be careful about our behavior on social media, because it's a testimony. You know, it really reflects who we are as Christians, and we need to raise the bar when it comes to our behavior on social media.
And to realize that our behavior, people, they're watching it.
They are.
And we can't be naive and think, well, that would never happen to a Christian, like a pastor, to think, well, I will never be tempted by someone, or I will never do this. Because I've learned, like, we should probably never say never, and we need to safeguard ourselves so that stupid things don't happen.
One of the things I'm very big on is, let's create as many obstacles as we can to stop stupid decisions. You know, that may mean if you're going on an extended trip to minister, to preach, take your wife. You know, take your wife, take a trusted associate with you. Don't go by yourself, and certainly don't go with someone of the opposite sex. Just think about these things, because we just need to be really careful. Put in windows in your offices or glass doors. Just let's create as many obstacles as we can for something wrong to happen.
Because most of the time, not all of the time, but most of the time, people are well-intended. They're not really thinking about that happening. In fact, they're thinking that will never happen. But if you have glass windows in the office, right? Like, between my husband and I, we just made an agreement as a married couple. I don't go to lunch or to dinner with somebody of the opposite sex unless he's there or there are other people there. I don't think I'm going to do anything. I don't think the other person is either. But if I safeguard myself, it will never happen.
And a lot of it's perception. You know, it keeps somebody from criticizing you who saw saw her with Bob or with Sam, and that makes a big difference too.
So part of this is really about thinking ahead.
Perception.
Perception. Is perception reality?
Oh, it is for a lot of people, that's for sure. It is.
In the world in which we live. And so when you talk, and I know, again, you're a producer, but people are calling you in because we don't know what to do. how do you help them with those questions like press releases
Yeah.
and how much information to give or not to give?
I'll tell you, the cardinal rule in my book is you always want to tell the truth. When you go public with a crisis, a situation, a problem, you always want to tell the truth. Now, you don't have to go into the ugly details, particularly if it's a minor.
Mhm.
We want to safeguard and protect the minor. However, we need to tell the truth. Very often, ministry leaders will say, I want to protect the church, or I want to protect the family, or whatever, and they either they're not completely forthcoming, and they don't tell the truth. And I'll tell you, that will always come back and hurt you later, because it erodes trust. And if you're a pastor, a ministry leader, the trust your congregation has with you is critical. And if you're a ministry leader, the trust your donors or supporters has is critical. So I always say, don't cover anything up ever under any circumstances. Always tell the truth according to what you know at the time, particularly at the beginning. You don't know all the details, but tell the truth according to what you know at the time. And that's the best way to avoid real problems.
Because I think in an effort, sometimes we think to protect.
Yes.
That people don't want it to get out. Now, the book name is Church on Trial by Phil Cooke, and I think it's a resource that's going to help your congregation and just help you safeguard. Lots of people think, well, we'll just pray about this.
Yeah.
And we're not going to.
Okay. You just opened up an interesting question. Can we talk about this?
Yes.
We're Christians, and we want to believe the best in everybody. One of the things I'm really big on in the book is we need to be more aware and sensitive to red flags. I'll give you a great example. I was writing the book, and I found a church in Chicago that the pastor had trained his team in these kind of issues. And so a couple ushers one Sunday noticed there was a young guy visiting the church, nice guy, very friendly, but they started watching and noticing he was really looking at kids, really looking at kids a lot. And so they pulled him aside, introduced themselves, got his name, and they went back into the office and Googled his name and found out he was on the sex offender registry. And so they needed to have the sit down with him about, okay, we want you to come to church. We want Jesus to change your life, but there's certain boundaries you have to go by. Just like the law enforcement gives you boundaries in the world, you have to have boundaries here at the church. But it only happened because they were paying attention. They were looking for red flags. So it doesn't give you permission to be the behavior cop at your church or your ministry, because false accusations can destroy someone's life.
Absolutely.
We have to be very sensitive. However, I do think at the same time, if we could stop something before it happens, and maybe it's an executive pastor coming in the morning looking strangely like he's got a hangover, or maybe some woman on the staff that's coming in with bruising, and she says, well, I fall a lot. Well, maybe something else is going on.
Right.
If we could be a little more sensitive, maybe we go to a senior leader and say, I'm noticing this about Bob. He's coming in late every day, or Susan's leaving early every day. Maybe we should talk to them about it. That could save a life and save a church.
Yes, because usually there are red flags.
There are.
Yes. And we because we want to believe the best, or because it's uncomfortable, right? We don't want to say anything. We've got to take a break.
Sure.
Stay with us. When we come back, we're going to talk more with Phil Cooke about Church on Trial. Don't give in. God's word says you're an overcomer. It takes training. It takes discipline. And so when you're fighting that good fight of the faith, you take your story, whatever it is, and you saturate it in faith, and you fight for it.
Visit monicaschmelter.com to schedule Monica to speak at your next event.
If you're just joining us on Bridges today, Phil Cooke is my guest, and we are talking about Church on Trial. And Phil, we've been talking about we don't want crises to come, but they do.
They do.
Then when they come, we need to face them truthfully with as much truth as much as we know at the time to be true. And, as crises come, they also go. Thank you, Jesus.
We get through somehow,
we get through them. God helps us.
Yeah.
How then does a church live or thrive after a crisis is
That's
over?
a really good question. And it's funny that we ended the last segment talking about red flags.
Yeah.
And one of the things I do when the crisis is over, when we've helped the church navigate through a crisis, I like to sit down the leaders together and say, look, knowing what you know now, looking back at the last few years, do you see any red flags you should have noticed? And they always say, oh yeah, now I know why Sam was doing this or Judy was doing this. Now I get it. So I think going back to our earlier segment, being just sensitive to these things and acting on them in an appropriate, sensitive way, respectful way is really critical. The other thing I would say is, as you get through the crisis, if it was a moral, collapse, an abusive situation, an infidelity situation, whatever, I think that you want to get rid of that leader's material. Get the books out of the bookstore, take his sermons offline, cut the social media accounts, delete the social media accounts. You want the congregation to focus on the future, not the past.
Okay.
You don't want to get hung up on what went wrong. You want to look at the future. And I always encourage leaders to get the church refocused on the future. Get back to what you do best. If you're an inner city church, get back to that work. If you're a rural church, get back to that work. I think the quicker you can refocus. Now, the church, we forget very often that in an abusive situation and in many of these crisis situations, the congregation is a victim too. It's not just, there's not just a male or female victim. The congregation is a victim, and they often need to grieve. So it's important to let them grieve and get through that and shepherd them through it. And I often recommend we immediately bring in another strong pastor or spiritual leader, at least on a temporary basis, to help guide the church through. But I do think refocus, put your hand back on the plow, do what you do best, and focus on the future. And that's the best way to come out of a crisis.
Yeah, because you can't let it derail you for the rest of the time.
Right.
Right. But what I hear you saying is, it's first like that time of processing in a sense of, did you see red flags?
Yeah.
And I think when I look back to that experience that my husband and I had, okay, so after all that came to light and the guy got arrested and he was convicted, I did see red flags.
Interesting.
There were times that he got angry about things that were seemingly nothing where this child was concerned. He was overly concerned about her having a boyfriend, like not just a concerned dad. I mean, just over the top. And I just attributed to him, he was kind of a hot-headed guy. Like if I would have thought, I certainly would have got on it right that second. But when I looked back, it's like, okay, I saw that, but I didn't know what to do. And I kept telling myself, well,
one of the reasons I like to review red flags is I want to create guardrails for the future so it doesn't happen again. How do we create a policy? How do we educate the team, educate the staff, the volunteers? It's funny, I've had a number of churches buy boxes of my books to give to the elders, to give to the volunteers, to give to the staff, because the more people that are up to speed on this, the better off you'll be. And it makes a big, big difference. So I think, creating a financial plan so that people can't embezzle money from the church, having those guardrails is critical. And that's why we look back at those red flags in the past to see, okay, what could we change about the future to make sure this never happens again?
Yeah, I think the red flags that I saw, if I had it to do over, I would have talked with my husband and see if he saw any of that. And then if we needed to take a next step. But I didn't know. I was innocent in that regard, but now I know to proceed cautiously. I would have done something because doing nothing is not the correct thing to do. When I hear you say Church on Trial, churches buying boxes of these. So one of the things that I think that's great about that is that the more people who know kind of that crisis will happen at some point, that know what to expect, the less challenged the entire congregation is, because you have more than just the pastor who can say, right, we're going to deal with this truthfully. This is what's going to happen. So you've got help, you've got support in the congregation so that all those 20-something% don't walk away because you don't know what you're doing and you don't know how to handle it. So just for an individual.
Of all the churches I've dealt with and helped them navigate through these situations, you'd be amazed at the number of volunteers who spotted the problem. Or the elders who spotted a problem, or a staff member that spotted the problem. So the more they're up to speed on here's what I should do and how to react and how to respond, the better off you'll be.
Well, those are the frontline people.
They really are.
Right. I mean, if you're the pastor, and the pastor may very well be involved with the congregation, not just one of those that's always sequestered away, but people are typically on their best behavior for the pastor. Because that's the pastor. But the nursery person that's volunteering, right? Or in children's church, those workers, that children's pastor is seeing those parents, and there's not as much of that, I don't want to call it pretense, but whatever that is, trying to put up a good example, right? Those people see. And I think it's important for leaders to listen to volunteers None of us want to deal with that, right? We don't want that to happen, but we need to listen so that if there is a problem, I love what you said about being cautious. We don't want to accuse people because it could be false.
It could be false, yep.
It could be, and we don't want to be accused falsely. I think that would be awful, but we need to do something.
I'll tell you, if people don't listen to anything else in this episode, your word to listen is the most important thing ever. And I find pastors need to listen to their team and their staff and create a culture where the staff feels comfortable. Very often, you know, these crisis situations happen not because the pastor's a jerk, but the staff holds him in such high regard and respect that they see something they're uncomfortable with, but they don't say anything.
Right.
And so you want to sit down with your team and say, guys, look, I'm the pastor, or the ministry leader. However, if I say something inappropriate, if you see something I do or how I act, please let me know. Talk to me. Tell me, you know, how to fix this, because that could really stop a major problem.
Yes. And to be that confident in the Lord, that you can say that to people. You know, I tell people, if I say something or do something, I would appreciate it if you would just talk to me, right? And I will listen. Maybe I'll agree, maybe I won't, but let's talk that through before it becomes gossip or because I agree. If we create that kind of environment, that this is a healthy place and we can all talk and we can all talk respectfully and biblically, then we don't get over to the other side where it's like, and people are yelling and screaming and acting crazy.
All right, let me say you one last thing and we'll quit. But take care of the victim. If it's an abusive situation, a sexual situation, very often the church doesn't, they respect the pastor. They can't believe this is happening. And they tend to not get counseling, be concerned, listen, take care of the victim. And I just say, look, the first thing I would do is, even if you're doubtful, if you're not sure of the facts yet, if you haven't done an investigation or you're not sure, still take care, respect them, take care of them, because that will come out so much better. It will help them. It'll just be so much better than ignoring them, not being sure what to do, or worse, dismissing them.
Well, because that happens a lot.
It does a lot.
People doubt the victim, or they believe the victim, but they love the pastor or the leader so much that, they've done so much good. They've done so much good. We don't want this to get out because they've done a lot of good things, and they probably have. Done a lot of good things. However, we don't get a free pass on abusing somebody.
Ever.
And, these women, boys, girls, men, we can't just overlook this stuff. That's not biblical.
Not at all. Not at all. And it'll always, it's just wrong. And again, it comes out of ignorance. It comes out of people not knowing what to do. They freeze up. They get in a deer in a headlight mode, and they just don't know what to do. And that's why I spend so much time in the book talking about taking care of the victim, arrange for counseling, whatever. Make sure the authorities know what's going on if it's an abusive situation. And so that's really a critical thing.
Yeah. Uh-oh, you're getting a call. Don't take it.
Edit.
So one of the things I want to ask you when you talk about taking care of the victim, because a lot of people, right, in their churches, they might have a pastoral counselor, different thing. Should they get a counseling service outside of that church? Because
I would say two things. Number one, you want a great attorney. There's so many legal ramifications here. Number one, an attorney should be on speed dial. There are just so many issues. The second thing is, do develop a relationship with a counselor preferably outside the church. Even if you have a counseling center in your church, outside is always better because you want an objective investigation. That's so important.
Well,
so have that,
because I think if it's inside the church, then people would tend to think that you're just trying to protect this thing.
It
You're
happens
just
a lot.
trying to keep it all in house. And I understand, none of us want all this out for the world to see. But yet, if that happened, we have to deal with it.
You have to deal with it. Exactly. And the third thing I say, after an attorney and a counselor that have a communications professional, that on speed dial, because very often what you'll find is, aside from the original problem, how you communicate that problem generates even more criticism. In fact, we've seen some big headlines recently of major churches, major ministries. It wasn't just the problem was bad enough. the crisis was bad enough, but then they did a poor job of communicating it,
Yeah.
and that even generated more criticism.
Well, it's like you've got this sin that happened, be that
Yes.
embezzlement or whatever, and now we've lied about it and tried to cover it up. So now we've
Yes.
got this sin and we've got that
True.
sin,
Yes.
right? And then
It's
we've
so
got
true.
to battle through all of that.
So true.
And while God forgives,
Yep.
we still have to walk through consequences.
Oh,
There's
yeah.
still things that
You've
we all
broken
need to
trust
do.
with your congregation.
Yes.
One church had a sexually abusive situation with a youth leader. They did the right thing. They notified the authorities. They fired him, but they didn't tell the congregation for like 5 years.
Oh,
And when the congregation found out, they were livid because they've been sending their kids to this youth program. And even though the offender was gone, they hadn't been told about this. And so they were really upset. The trust was broken. People left in droves. And so you really have to be honest and upfront
Yeah.
with these things.
and I read in the book, and again, the book is Church on Trial by Phil Cooke. You said, don't tell your church by email. Tell them in person.
Yeah, if at all possible. My feeling is, particularly if the situation happens toward the end of the week, or you can delay a little bit, I want you to explain everything to the congregation face to face.
Yeah.
It's not, you don't want to release it via email or any other, a letter. If you can do it face to face, it's always better. And so I really encourage churches to do that. It's just manning up and being honest.
Exactly. It's part of being a leader
Yes.
and taking accountability and being transparent. It's all those things. We're out of time,
It's all right.
but I want to thank you so much, Phil,
I've
for
had
coming.
fun. Thank you.
Thank you.
Finding hope in today's life is not always easy. Bridges with Monica Schmelter is making it simple. You can now listen to podcast episodes on popular platforms like iTunes, Spotify, iHeartRadio, Life Audio, and more by searching for Monica Schmelter to find God's hope for your journey.
Life can be hard and days can be long. So if you're looking for hope for the journey, monicaschmelter.com is a great place to get started. On monicaschmelter.com, you'll find Monica's teachings on demand. And if you're looking to really grow your faith, you'll find online extras are available with every teaching. So don't wait another day. Get started now at monicaschmelter.com and you will find hope for the journey.
Today's Hope for the Journey is about red flags. They are really everywhere in relationships and in situations. And here's the thing. We can learn to listen, open up our eyes, and look for those red flags. And we can pray and ask God to give us wisdom about what to do. The Bible promises us in the book of James that if we ask for wisdom, that God will give it to us. And I love this part. He says he will give it to us generously and without finding fault with us. So when you see those red flags and you have that concern, don't ignore it. It's there for a reason. Just listen and then ask God, what is it that you want me to do about this? And God always, he says to ask, to seek, to knock, and that he will answer. So when you see a red flag, ask God what to do and he will show you. I'm out of time for today, but I say goodbye and God bless you.